Listen as a rock climber recalls an experience he once had.
When you first start climbing, you're very aware of capability. But after a while, you just do it without reflecting on it at the time. When you're climbing, you have to devote yourself totally to the climb. You fuse your thinking with the rock. It's the Zen feeling, like meditating or concentrating. One thing you're after is the one-pointedness of mind. You can get your ego mixed up with climbing in all sorts of ways, and it isn't necessarily enlightening. But when things become automatic, it's like an egoless thing in a way. Somehow, the right thing is done without you ever thinking about it or doing anything at all. It just happens.
What is the difference between pleasure and enjoyment? Professor Csikszetmihalyi tells us why only one of them leads to personal growth.
By now, you may have noticed that the enjoyable state of flow is quite different from what people think of as pleasure. In fact, this is true. Pleasure is a good feeling programmed in our genes to make us do things that at one time in the past, before we were born, was good for the evolution of the human species. So we feel pleasure when we eat because this way our body is sure to get enough nutrition. We feel good about having sex because this way our body is sure to reproduce itself. Pleasure is automatic. Anyone can experience it, and it needs no skills. The downside of pleasure is that while it is necessary for survival, it does not help us grow. We can eat all we want, have as much sex as we can get, yet we will remain exactly what we were, without new skills, without new experiences. In fact, pleasure can be dangerous because if we don't learn how to control it, we can easily get addicted to it. Then we will spend our life overeating, getting trapped in routine sexuality, doing all the other things the genes have programmed us to do because it feels good, and in the process missing all the other exciting things that life offers. Enjoyment, on the other hand, does not come from simply satisfying our instincts. Flow is the result of recognizing new challenges, of developing skills we didn't have before. For this reason, flow leads to growth and to higher levels of complexity. But to lead a happy life, it is not enough to have many isolated flow experiences. The real important goal to shoot for is to learn to find enjoyment in any situation that may come up. To do so, you must become master of your consciousness. You must know how to harness attention to your goals. Everything we do happens in consciousness. Everything we experience happens in consciousness. In other words, you are aware of what happens around you, what happens inside you, only to the extent that these events are reflected in consciousness. For instance, if I want to tie my shoelace or want to drive a car, these activities are not possible unless I pay attention to them. And attention is, unfortunately, a limited resource. There is only so much we can attend to at any given moment. And attention is what is reflected in consciousness. That is, we can imagine consciousness to be like a searchlight that moves around, and whatever it illuminates we can see. But whatever it's not in the beam of the light is in darkness, we cannot see it. And so consciousness, which reflects our attention, is what we need in order to accomplish anything in life. And if our consciousness is in order, we can use our attention more effectively. But if what we are aware in consciousness is discrepant goals, things that conflict with each other, we want, at this point, we would like to have a snack, but actually we have to work, and we feel this tug of war between our hunger and our job, that conflict reduces our ability to be effective. So, an ordered consciousness, a consciousness which is effective, is the most important thing we can expect from our life. Because if that consciousness is focused and ordered, then anything we do can be enjoyable and we can accomplish what we want to achieve.
Flow experiences derive from autotelic experiences.
When you are in an activity that produces flow or an autotelic experience, then consciousness is in harmony and focused. An autotelic experience is one that is worth having for its own sake. From the Greek word auto, self, and telos, goal, autotelic means it's an experience that is worth doing because it provides a special feeling, and the flow experience is what an autotelic experience is about. It makes you feel completely focused, in harmony with yourself, pursuing a goal, getting feedback, forgetting yourself, and being totally in the moment and doing it. It's important because that's when we feel most alive. It's important because that's when we are most effective, when we are most completely ourselves. And the more we can have that experience, the better off we are. One of my favorite examples is Linus Pauling, the chemist who won a Nobel Prize in chemistry, and then he received a Nobel Prize for peace because he got so involved in trying to marshal scientific attention against the proliferation of nuclear armaments. Linus Pauling was over 90 years of age when we interviewed him for one of my studies. What is so impressive about this man is that although at 92 he should have slowed down, he's actually still totally alert and incredibly sharp, and he remembers everything that mattered in his life to the smallest details. And what is so amazing about him is that his whole life is made up of, as a whole, kind of seamless adventure. Everything he did is related to what he did in the past, and he's always ready for new challenges, but those challenges flow almost spontaneously from what he remembers of his earliest years. For instance, the first memories he had was working in his father's pharmacy. His father was a pharmacist in Portland, Oregon, and in the back room of his drugstore, the young Linus would be put to, with a pestle and a mortar to break up talcum and other chemicals and mix them together to make new drugs. And he remembers the first surprise he had as a very small child, maybe 5, 6 years old, about how when you mix two different substances, you get a third one which is completely different from the others. And he was marveling at the wonder of this way in which nature worked. And that's the beginning of his interest in chemistry. Now, his father died when Linus was only 7 years old, but he had already caught the interest, the curiosity for this type of work. And luckily, there were other pharmacists in Portland who adopted him and had him work in their pharmacies when he had some free time from school. So this curiosity led him into becoming a chemist, and he made some startling advances in chemistry by combining it with quantum mechanics, and that's how we got the Nobel Prize. But what is most important for him is that while chemistry became a source of flow experiences for him, Pauling was able to develop a complex self, one that was able to persevere and develop new skills, while at the same time remaining open to new experiences, and he was able to recognize new opportunities all through his life. For instance, at some point he decided to switch from the highly specialized intellectual pursuit in which he had been involved and tackle the issue of what is the responsibility of a scientist towards society and towards nature. He put his body as well as his reputation on the line to protest against heedless nuclear development, organize scientists against nuclear armament, and for a while he became involved in national politics. He was jailed for his activities, and he was hailed by others, and eventually he got the Nobel Prize. But you look at him at 92, you see the energy, the curiosity, the interest of a 7-year-old still there. And you would think he's a child, but in the 85 years in between, he has accomplished tremendous things. And to me, he is one example of what an autotelic personality is, what a complex self is.
The 5 C's of a complex personality.
There are 5 characteristics that you could see as differentiating a person with a complex personality from those who do not have such. The first one is clarity, that is, knowing what you want to do in your life as a whole, but also moment to moment as you go through the everyday activities of your life. Clarity of goals and also clarity of feedback, the ability to read your performance, to read how well you're doing and adjust yourself to what is happening around you. So clarity would be the first. The second is the ability to center, that is, to focus, to know how to avoid distractions, how to become at one with what you're doing, to have all of your consciousness, all of your attention at your control, under your control. So if you can have clear goals and if you can control your attention and your psychic energy so you are centered when you need to, when you want to, those are the first 2 characteristics. Third, we could call it choice. That is, knowing that there is a variety of possibilities around you, that you are not determined by outside events, that you are not forced to do the things you do, but you have a choice and you can move and focus that attention that you have controlled so that whatever you are doing is not because you have to do it, but because you want to do it, because this is what you have chosen to do. So that's the third characteristic. The fourth is the ability to commit yourself, to care for what you're doing. So you can choose, but you can choose it without really feeling that this is important for you. But people with a complex personality feel that what they do, whatever they do, they care for. They care about it. They're committed to it. So even trivial things like driving a car or mowing your lawn, it's something that you have chosen and you are committed to, and it's an important characteristic, this fourth one. The fifth and final characteristic is challenge. That is, you keep upping the challenge as you have mastered a certain level. You are always ready for novelty. You are always ready for making your life more exciting and more challenging. So these 5 characteristics, each one of which starts with the C, clarity, centering, choice, commitment, and challenge, are typical of people with a complex personality. Complex self is one that can get flow experiences from not just enjoyable activities like playing tennis or playing music, but that can relate to everything around it so as to derive flow from it. In other words, you are open to a greater variety of experiences than other people, and you know how to integrate this greater variety of experiences into your activities so that you can wait at the dentist's office in the waiting room, and instead of being bored, instead of being frustrated and worried, you can enjoy waiting for the dentist too. Or you can get stuck in traffic, and instead of cursing and fuming, you can find a way to enjoy yourself even there.
How to overcome feeling either bored or anxious.
Flow leads to complexity because once you have experienced it, you want to experience it again and again. But to do so, you have to keep taking on new challenges or you will become bored. And to develop new skills or you will start getting frustrated and anxious. Psychic entropy is the concept that describes how we feel when part of our mind is trying to do one thing and our feelings go in a different direction and our body is clamoring to go in yet a third direction. That is, we are torn by different goals, by different desires, different purposes, or as we can't satisfy these different things we want to do, inevitably we feel conflict in our consciousness. We feel that our goals cannot be all satisfied because at the same time we need or want to do different things. This state is psychic entropy, and it has a very similar meaning as entropy has in physics. In other words, entropy means confusion, inability to do work, randomness, chaos. And when you apply these concepts to your consciousness, psychic entropy means chaos also, because you are conflicted, you can't act efficiently, you feel that you want something that the other part doesn't want, and so you feel a tension, a conflict which immobilizes your consciousness, and so you can't achieve anything, and you feel confused and conflicted. Both boredom and anxiety are two states of psychic entropy. In other words, neither one of them is a state where you can feel good and operate efficiently. In boredom, the entropy comes from the lack of focus. Your mind goes all in circles. You feel bad about yourself. You feel sorry about yourself. You wish things were different. You sigh. You look out the window. You hope that something is going to happen to you. But you're not using your mind. You're not using your skills, your body in any efficient way. So it's like random movement of molecules in a jar or something. Your mind is just kind of going in circles and nothing is happening. Anxiety is an entropic state because there you feel that you are overwhelmed, that you have to defend yourself against the incoming forces, against the danger or the threats, and you are looking left and right, trying to find a way out. And again, you are not in control of your consciousness. You cannot focus, you cannot operate efficiently. So both anxiety and boredom are states of psychic entropy. One of the people I interviewed when we were studying flow in work situations was a young assembly line worker who I would call Julio Martinez. Julio was working on the assembly line one day, and his mind was obviously somewhere else. He was distracted, he was irritable, he got into 2 or 3 little fights with his co-workers. So it was clear that he wasn't concentrating, that his mind was struggling. And in the interview, it came out that what was bothering Julio was that a few days earlier, he started noticing the tire on his car was must have been punctured because it was getting very low. And so he had air pumped into it at a service station in the morning. By the evening, when he got out of work, the tire was down again. Now, he didn't have the money to fix the tire until he was paid at the end of the month. So he just filled it up with air again and rushed home, and next morning it was down again. So he filled it up again and drove as fast as he could to work. But while he was working, he was still thinking about the tire and what would happen that night. Would he make it home, or would the rim start scraping the pavement before he got home? So that's an example of what would happen normally if you have no resources to cope with a problem of that kind. Now, if he had friends, he could have borrowed some money. If he knew how to use credit, he could have gotten credit, but he was new to the country. He didn't have friends. He was at the mercy of this external threat, this worry that bothered him, and his mind was trying to cope with this problem and reducing his efficiency as a worker, but even more, it was making it impossible for him to enjoy what he was doing, to focus in, because the threat destroyed his control over his psychic energy, over his attention. Task of breaking his record on, let's say, the high jump or something equally difficult. So he had cut down the time it took him to do this job from 47 seconds to something close to 30. And he felt that having done this, he has developed his skill, developed his abilities, and he was extremely proud, even though he didn't get paid more for this. It didn't really help the assembly line because the people down from his place were still going at the old pace. So for Rico, this focus on bettering his record, of improving on his time, was simply a question of pride, of ability to develop his skills. And while he was working, he was completely involved in it. He kept saying how much better it was than watching TV or hanging out in a tavern with his buddies, that he felt so much more alive when he did his work. And he wasn't just stuck in his rut either, because he knew that after going below 30, he may hit 25 seconds, but below that he couldn't really go. And so at night, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, he was taking courses in electronics so he could get a better job. And he was close to getting a diploma and finding a more challenging job. So that approach is one where you see this kind of focusing of energy on goals and feedback, on developing skills, which characterizes the flow experience. alive, anxiety and boredom will disappear, and you won't waste or regret any moment of your life. Flow is like a magnet for growth. It pulls us to higher and higher levels of being, to increasingly more complex experiences.
Lucio, a 22-year-old whose motorcycle accident left him paralyzed below the waist, remembers.
When I became paraplegic, it was like being born again. I had to learn from scratch everything I used to know, but in a different way. I had to learn to dress myself, to use my head better. I had to become part of the environment and use it without trying to control it. It took commitment, willpower, and patience. As far as the future is concerned, I hope to keep improving, to keep breaking through the limitations of my handicap. Everybody must have a purpose. After becoming paraplegic, these improvements have become my life goal.
One purpose for achieving the flow state is to create happiness even in times of hardship.
If everything goes well with you, having flow may not be such a problem. But what if some sudden tragedy strikes, if you lose your health, your money, or the comforts of your home? Conditions of duress put the ability to be happy to a severe test. Yet, it is clear that people who learn to build flow in their lives, people who have an autotelic personality, are able to weather the storms and stresses of life. Now we will talk a little bit about how individuals confronted by great personal tragedies were able to transform the negative situation into a tolerable one and often ended up enjoying their lives more afterwards instead of letting tragedy destroy them. I'm talking here specifically about a group of people studied by one of my colleagues in Europe, Professor Massimini in Milan, who has focused particularly on people who had lost their sight, who became blind, and on another group who have lost the use of their limbs, paraplegics who had been in accidents. And the investigation was focused on finding out whether some of these people, despite these horrible tragedies that happened to them, were able to find a way of living a life that was more or less tolerable. And what he found, to his great surprise, is that many of these people not only found ways to live a tolerable life, but they actually found that their life after the accident, after the tragedy, was in many ways more focused, more purposeful, more meaningful than it had been before. It's as if the tragedy made it clear to them what they had to do in order to live a life that was harmonious, that was autotelic, that is self-rewarding. For instance, one of the subjects that were studied was a young man of 30 years old who had lost his sight when he was 24 years old, and here is how he described what happened to him.
First, although I recognize and accept my limitations, I'm going to keep attempting to overcome them. Second, I have decided to always try changing the situations that I don't like. Third, I'm very careful not to repeat any of the mistakes that I make. And finally, I try to be tolerant with myself so I can be tolerant with others.
Now, this young man who is now 30 taught himself to play chess, and he is going to all kinds of international tournaments. He just had come back from Spain, where he played in a championship. He also swims competitively, and he had been to a swim meet in Sweden where he competed against other people who had some handicaps. Now, this kind of a focus and consciously living life was something that he lacked before the accident. He just went along doing things that were mildly interesting, mildly enjoyable, But now that he knows that he has to either sink or swim, figuratively speaking, he either lets this horrible event, the loss of sight, either he lets that destroy his life, or he has to learn to be in control of his situation. And fortunately, he chose the second course. He chose to make the best of the situation in which he was before, and now he is doing things that he never thought he would be doing. Another respondent that was studied was a woman who became blind at age 12, and now she's 33. And she also enjoys her work. She's a switchboard operator, and she thinks of it as being an orchestra conductor as she's switching the calls back and forth. And she says, when I'm working, I feel like I'm God or something. It's very fulfilling. She feels that she has become more mature as a result of having to take control of her life. Problems no longer bother her like they do her friends who are still sighted. The point is that before she became blind at age 12, she felt that she was at the mercy of a family that was really not very loving, not very caring, and she felt that she would never amount to anything. But then, as a result of the accident, she realized again that it was up to her, that nobody was going to help her. And if she let go at that point, she would be completely helpless, whereas if she learned to help herself, she would be able to pull through. Another example was a young man who lost the use of his limbs in a motorcycle accident. He had been an electrician, and he was known for acrobatic dancing on Saturday nights in his neighborhood. And once he became paralyzed, of course, this greatest source of enjoyment in his life was lost. But now he feels that he can be of use to other people because he has become a counselor of other accident victims, and he helps them to accept and overcome their situations. Like many of the other people who had been interviewed, he has more confidence and joy in his life now than he had before the accident. These examples are just some indications of how often in life an initial hardship or even a tragedy can help us direct our energies, focus them, so that we choose our own goals, so that we develop a discipline to learn the skills to overcome the challenges that are presented by the world around. For instance, in a study of 300 of some of the most successful and eminent people, the two authors, who were a married couple, Gertzel and Gertzel, concluded that practically in most cases, the families of these very successful people had either died early, or the parents were alcoholic, or they had some other severe problem which affected the early childhood of these future eminent people. Whether it's someone like Winston Churchill, who became the leader of the Western world during World War II, or Wilma Rudolph, who became an Olympic champion as a runner. There are hundreds of these examples of people whose childhood was full of hardship and yet somehow overcame the situation and became eminent in one form or the other. Now, for instance, the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre said that the greatest gift that a father can give his son is to die early. And the reason for that is that so many successful artists and politicians are orphaned early in life, and it's because of feeling abandoned and feeling left out that they summon the energy to find a direction in life and overcome the obstacles. Now, this seems to contradict the fact that a family that's supportive and warm is going to produce young people who develop an autotelic personality. But in fact, what seems to be so interesting is that adults who learn to control their lives, adults who develop autotelic personalities, seem to come from the two extremes of childhood experience. They come from families that either are supportive and encouraging and stimulating, or they come from families where the hardships are such that the young person as a child has to fight to develop a future for herself or himself. So it's just the kind of great middle ground that is in some ways more dangerous. That is the kind of families that are neither warm and concerned about their children, nor do they have enough challenge for them to kind of react against that hardship. So the point is that one can benefit from hardship too. One can find in the challenges that life presents the inducement, the reason for saying, no, I'm not going to let this happen to me. I'm not going to allow this accident or this situation to overwhelm me. I have to find a way out. And that's where the strength for many people comes, that will make it possible for them to have a life which is going to reflect their own goals, which is going to have enough of the discipline and the skills that are necessary for a person to get really involved with what he or she is doing.
Flow and the effects of stress.
Now, in everyday life, even if we don't have these sort of great problems such as being in an accident that deprives us of our limbs or of having come from a childhood which was very difficult, we still have problems. We are constantly exposed to the slings and arrows of fate. We have illness, economic problems, conflicts with family, conflicts on our job, and the cumulative effect of all of these strains that all of us must face is that we do experience stress. Two psychologists who have developed a scale for measuring stress, their names are Holmes and Ray, had listed all of the events that we can face in our life and tried to find a weight that represents how much stress these events have on us. For instance, the highest form of stress that anyone can face is the loss of a child. If you are a parent and you are in the terrible situation of losing a child, that is the strongest form of stress that is generally reported. One of the lowest forms of stresses that people have to confront is Christmas holidays. On a scale of 100, Christmas holidays score 17. And so, in a sense, 5 Christmases begin to approach the highest form of stress that we can have. In between Christmas and the loss of a dear one, there is innumerable causes of stress, like getting a parking ticket or having to decide whether to mortgage your home or having problems at work. All of these create stress. And to the extent that you have stress, you will experience psychic entropy in consciousness. In other words, you will have nagging doubts, nagging problems, conflicting desires, worries that you have to allocate attention to. And to the extent that you do that, you can't achieve this harmonious, concentrated feeling which flow produces. So, in other words, stress will begin to conflict with the ability to enjoy your life. Now, there are ways, of course, to minimize the stress because, as I said at an earlier point, stress is not automatic. Stress is our reaction to external strain. And depending on how we react to the external strain, we can feel this entropy in consciousness or we don't. And so to a large extent, we can control the effect of external stimuli on our experience.
Three ways to minimize stress.
There are generally three major ways to make sure that stress is not experienced when external conditions produce strain. In studying people who seem to be able to take stress in stride, we find that one of the first conditions is what we have called unselfconscious self-assurance. Unselfconscious is an important factor. As we said before, in flow, you lose consciousness of the self, of the ego. You become involved completely in what you're doing. This ability to lose your self-consciousness is very important also in facing stress. That is, when something is happening outside that could be threatening, if you look at it, external threat, and you become very aware of how the threat could influence you, what terrible things could happen to you if that stressful event were to happen, then you become completely involved with defensive, repressive, worried reactions, and probably your effectiveness, your ability to confront this external strain is going to decline. So it's important to be somewhat detached, to forget about always constantly protecting or worrying about yourself. And the best way to become unselfconscious in this sense is, of course, to be somewhat self-assured. That is, it is people who are fairly secure in their skills, in their abilities, who can afford to forget themselves, who can just operate on the problem rather than having to worry about themselves constantly. A good example would be, suppose you're driving in a car and there is a great amount of traffic. As you move in the traffic and there are cars zigging by, passing you by and cutting into the lanes, if you are too worried about what may happen to you, of getting into an accident, for instance, it's much more likely that the accident, in fact, is going to happen, or at least that you will end up all frazzled at the end of the ride. Whereas if you just pay attention to the traffic and you are constantly at one with your car, you are driving and thinking of the car and thinking of the flow of traffic rather than yourself, then you're much more likely to flow with the traffic and not to feel the stress that this type of driving may result in. And of course, to be an unselfconscious driver in that sense, you should be somewhat assured of yourself. You should have a fairly good feeling about having good reflexes, being able to anticipate what will happen. So the self-assurance is partly a result of past experience and partly a state of mind based on realistic skills. And so to achieve this unselfconscious self-assurance, it's good to have skills, it's good to have a positive attitude about one's past. And if you don't, then you perhaps better give up driving in traffic or take the bus. But to the extent that you can maximize these two elements, you can reduce stress. The second procedure for making stress less likely to affect you was implicit already in what I said before, and that is that you have to focus attention outside. It's not enough to be unselfconscious and to be assured of yourself unless your consciousness is taking in what is happening around you. That focusing attention on what happens, for instance, on the traffic, on the road, if you're driving, is what allows you to actually reduce objectively the nature of the external stress. For instance, on the job you are having problem with your boss, you had a conflict, you had a run-in with your boss. One solution, which is not the good one, is to focus attention on yourself and feel sorry for yourself and worry about what the consequences of this argument will be for you. The other one is to focus attention outside, to try to rehearse what went on, what set off this argument, what was the expression of your boss at different moments during the argument, what motivation may he have had that conflicted with what you said that precipitated this flare-up. So, in other words, you are processing information that is relevant to the event that caused the stress. You are completely involved in the external reality, and it's because of that that you can then hopefully resolve or avoid having the stress happening again. So that, in addition to self-conscious self-assurance, you have to focus your psychic energy, your attention on the situation in as objective a way as possible, which of course would be impossible if you were self-conscious, because then most of what goes in your attention is worrying about yourself. If you have these two conditions, then it's much more likely that you will discover new solutions, which is, of course, the way to reduce stress in the long run. You have to remove the causes, you have to understand the problems that caused it, and to do that, you have to have done the first two steps. You had to become objective, not self-conscious. You had to focus attention outside, and then you take the whole situation into consideration. You have to think about what is causing the stress in the long run and how can you overcome that now. Finally, as I said before, the third way to confront stress in a useful way is by discovering a new solution to the situation that produces stress. Is one that is differentiated and at the same time integrated. That is, a self which is open to experience, which has a variety of interests and skills, and yet one that is harmoniously integrated so that the various goals you have are meaningful and reinforce each other instead of conflicting with each other. To summarize here, in terms of what it takes for an autotelic personality to overcome stress, I will mention 4 major habits that autotelic people are able to rely on. The first habit is the ability to set goals. And over in these talks, I mentioned that setting goals, not only overall goals, but small goals as you go along, is one of the most important features for transforming activities that otherwise may be boring into activities that will produce flow. For instance, one of the good examples of a person who would have an autotelic self is someone I would call J.R., who is actually the CEO of one of the largest financial conglomerates in this country. He's one of these persons whom, when you see him interact in any situations, whether with strangers or colleagues, or whether he's traveling on a plane or stopping in Hong Kong in a hotel or whatever, he always knows what he wants to do in the situation. His goals are constantly popping up and framing his attention, giving him something to accomplish. Whether it's new people or people he knows, whether it's new situations or a new city, he will know what he wants to accomplish there and with these particular people. But I don't want to give the impression that when I say that he always knows what to do with a new person he meets, it's not that he's trying to use everyone. He's trying to understand them. That's the thing that makes him really different from lower level manipulating person. He's not trying to manipulate, to exploit, or to seduce the people he meets. He just wants to understand what they are about and how they fit within the program of his purpose. And if they are interesting people, if they are people with their own intentions, then he will respect that difference and try to understand them anyway, even if it's not something that fits within his plans. But he wants to know who is doing what, why, and for what purpose. So in order to be able to pursue these goals that he sets, JR, like other individuals who have this autocratic personality, they know how to pay attention. And that's the second step of an autocratic personality. Their attention is under their own controls. So, for instance, as they move through the day, they notice everything. They are processing information in a fresh way. They don't use stereotypes. They don't assume that they know what is happening around them. They don't assume that they know the room in which they are, the people they're talking to, but they are freshly noticing their environments, the things they interact with, and not from a selfish point of view again. It's not that they are trying to scope out their environment so that they can use it. They will use the parts of it that fit into their plans, but they are really paying attention because they are interested in what happens around them. Because you know what you want to accomplish and you're paying attention, then the third characteristic of a person like JR is that you become immersed in the activity, that you are not, even though you are objective and to a certain extent detached, you are part of it because you really do notice what happens, and therefore you can react appropriately to what happens. So the outcome of this, of course, is that you learn. You are always learning because you are paying attention and you are relating what you learn to your goals. So you can evaluate what is happening, you can make judgments about it, and you become a knowledgeable participant in everything you do. So you're not left out. You're not an observer. You are not a fellow traveler. You're not a tourist. You are there, part of whatever you do. And this is typical of a person like JR. or whether they are the ordinary aggravations that all of us must face in our daily existence. The great gift of flow is that if you have learned to achieve this state, you will have outcomes that match the best that we can dream of having in this life. First of all, you will enjoy every minute of your life. Second, you will achieve personal growth. That is, your skills will expand, your goals become more and more important to you and to others. And the third outcome is that it's through flow experiences that culture evolves. It is through flow that we can build new forms of art, new technologies, new science, new and better relationship among people. So the evolution of personal abilities, the development of personal skills is the energy out of which the evolution of culture is made. If there is one legacy that we can live to the future knowing that we have contributed something positive to it, it is to live our lives as a constant source of flow.
This has been a Nightingale Conant production for Simon & Schuster Audio.